The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured gardens of Kensington Palace as Catherine, Princess of Wales, walked slowly along the gravel path. Her usual confident stride had been replaced by something more hesitant, more thoughtful. The events of the past week had shaken her in ways she hadn't expected, and the weight of what she had discovered pressed heavily on her shoulders. It had started innocently enough. Catherine had been organizing family photographs for a special exhibition celebrating their 10th wedding anniversary when she stumbled upon a folder tucked away in William's private study. The folder was unremarkable, plain manila with no label, but something about its placement behind other files suggested it was meant to remain hidden. Inside were photographs that made her blood run cold. Not scandalous in the way the tabloids might imagine, but something far more troubling. Pictures of meetings, handshakes, conversations that she knew had never been reported to the palace communications team. William with men in expensive suits, in locations she didn't recognize, at times when he had told her he was attending other engagements. Catherine had always prided herself on understanding the delicate balance of royal duty and personal life. She knew that William, as heir to the throne, had responsibilities that sometimes required discretion. But these photographs suggested something different, something that made her question everything she thought she knew about her husband's activities. The palace staff had noticed the change in her demeanor immediately. Mrs. Henderson, her longtime lady-in-waiting, had inquired gently about her health during their morning briefing. Catherine had managed to smile and assured her that she was simply tired from recent engagements. But the truth was far more complicated. She thought back to the conversation she had overheard 3 weeks earlier. William had been on the phone in his private office, speaking in hushed tones that immediately caught her attention. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but something in his voice had made her pause outside the door. Words like arrangement, compensation, and discretion had filtered through the heavy yoke. When William had emerged, he seemed surprised to see her and had quickly explained he had been discussing security arrangements for an upcoming visit. Now, looking at the photographs, Catherine realized that conversation might have been about something entirely different. The palace operated like a well-oiled machine, with hundreds of staff members working tirelessly to maintain the royal family's image and schedule. But Catherine had begun to notice subtle changes in how certain staff members interacted with her. Conversations that stopped when she entered rooms, meaningful glances exchanged between senior advisors, and a general sense that important information was being kept from her. Sir Marcus Whitfield, William's private secretary, had been particularly evasive lately. A man who had served the royal family for over 2 decades, Sir Marcus was usually forthcoming about William's schedule and commitments. But recently, there had been gaps in the official diary that he dismissed as private time or personal matters when Catherine inquired. The photographs suggested these gaps were being filled with meetings that had significant implications. In one image, William was shaking hands with a man Catherine recognized as a prominent businessman who had been in the news for questionable dealings with foreign governments. In another, he was seated at what appeared to be a private dinner with individuals whose faces were partially obscured, but whose expensive clothing and confident postures suggested they were people of considerable influence. Catherine's training in art history had taught her to pay attention to details, and the details in these photographs were troubling. The body language, the settings, the apparent secrecy surrounding these meetings all pointed to something that went beyond normal royal duties. She had tried to approach the subject with William directly, but he had been unusually busy with official engagements. When she had finally managed to catch him alone, her carefully prepared questions seemed to make him uncomfortable. He had deflected with humor, kissed her forehead, and promised they would talk properly soon. But that conversation never came. The weight of her discovery was made heavier by the realization that she was completely alone with this knowledge. The royal family's motto of never complain, never explain seemed to apply even within the family itself. She couldn't confide in her parents, who had always maintained a respectful distance from royal affairs. Her sister Pippa was too removed from palace life to understand the complexities involved. Catherine found herself walking the palace grounds more frequently, seeking solace in the gardens where she and William had once shared so many happy moments. The irony wasn't lost on her that she felt isolated within one of the most watched residences in the world. The children had begun to notice her distraction. Prince George, now old enough to pick up on adult tensions, had asked if everything was all right between his parents. Catherine had reassured him with the practiced ease of someone trained to maintain composure under pressure. But internally, she was struggling with how to protect her children while grappling with her growing concerns about their father. Princess Charlotte, with the intuition that seemed to run in the family, had been more affectionate than usual, as if sensing her mother's need for comfort. Even Prince Louis, the youngest, seemed to cling to her more during their bedtime routine. The palace press office had been unusually active lately, fielding calls and managing stories that Catherine wasn't being briefed about. She had noticed increased activity in the communications wing, with staff working late into the evening and weekend meetings that weren't on the official schedule. James Morrison, the deputy communications secretary, had been particularly nervous around her recently. A normally confident man who handled media crises with skill, he seemed to stumble over his words when she asked routine questions about upcoming public appearances. The photographs had been taken over several months, suggesting this wasn't a single incident, but an ongoing pattern of behavior. Some were dated from times when William had officially been attending charitable events or family obligations. The discrepancy between his reported whereabouts and these images created a web of questions that Catherine was struggling to untangle. She had considered confronting William directly with the photographs, but something held her back. Perhaps it was the fear of what his explanations might reveal, or the worry that forcing the conversation might damage their relationship irreparably. The royal family had weathered many storms, but most of those had been public scandals. This felt different, more personal, and potentially more damaging. The palace security team had also exhibited unusual behavior. Increased patrols, additional checkpoints, and what appeared to be enhanced surveillance measures had been implemented without the usual briefings to family members. When Catherine had asked about the changes, she had been told they were routine security upgrades. But Catherine's instincts told her nothing about the current situation was routine. Her daily routine had become a careful performance. Public appearances required her to smile, wave, and engage with crowds while internally processing the implications of what she had discovered. The photographs sat in a locked drawer in her private sitting room, but their contents haunted her thoughts throughout each day. The annual charity gala was approaching, and Catherine knew it would require her to stand beside William, present a united front to the world, and maintain the facade of royal perfection. The irony of celebrating their charitable work while harboring such serious concerns about William's private activities felt overwhelming. She had begun to research the people in the photographs, using her access to palace resources to learn more about their backgrounds. What she discovered only deepened her concerns. These were not the typical business leaders or philanthropists who usually sought meetings with the royal family. Several had connections to industries and governments that the monarchy typically avoided due to ethical considerations. The palace staff's loyalty to William was absolute, as it should be. But Catherine began to wonder if that loyalty extended to protecting him from consequences that might result from activities she was only beginning to understand. Late at night, when the palace was quiet and the children were asleep, Catherine found herself staring out of her bedroom window at the London skyline. The city that had become her home, the role that had defined her adult life, and the man she had married all seemed different now. The photographs had changed her perspective on everything. She thought about the young woman who had walked down the aisle of Westminster Abbey more than a decade ago, full of hope and excitement about joining the royal family. That woman had believed in the nobility of their mission, the importance of their role, and the integrity of the institution she was joining. Now, Catherine wondered if she had been naive about the complexities and compromises that came with royal life at the highest levels. The children's laughter from the garden below reminded her of what was at stake. Whatever William was involved in, whatever these photographs represented, the implications extended far beyond their marriage. The monarchy itself, the institution their children would inherit, could be affected by the decisions being made in secret meetings and private arrangements. Catherine realized she needed more information before she could decide how to proceed. The photographs were just the beginning. If William was involved in something that could damage the royal family's reputation or integrity, she needed to understand the full scope of the situation. But gathering that information would require her to navigate the palace's complex web of loyalties, traditions, and protocols. It would mean questioning people who had served the family faithfully for years, potentially putting them in impossible positions between their duty to William and their respect for her. As the sun set over London, Catherine made a decision. She would use her position, her connections, and her intelligence to uncover the truth. The photographs had opened a door she couldn't close, and she needed to see what lay beyond it. The palace watches everything, she reflected, but perhaps it was time for the palace to be watched in return. Catherine's investigation began with careful observation. Over the next several days, she made mental notes of every interaction, every conversation, and every deviation from normal palace routine. Her training in public relations and her years of experience reading people served her well as she began to piece together a pattern of behavior that extended far beyond what the photographs had initially revealed. The breakthrough came during a routine morning briefing with palace staff. Mrs. Patricia Collins, the head of household operations, mentioned in passing that certain areas of the palace would be off-limits during the upcoming week due to maintenance work. When Catherine asked for specifics, Mrs. Collins became notably uncomfortable, explaining that the work was being coordinated directly through Sir Marcus Whitfield's office. This struck Catherine as unusual. Maintenance work typically went through the Royal Collection Trust or the Property Services Department, not through William's private secretary. The areas being restricted included the private meeting rooms adjacent to William's study, spaces that were rarely used for family activities, but would be perfect for confidential meetings. That afternoon, Catherine decided to test her theory. She deliberately walked past the supposedly restricted areas and found them bustling with activity, but not the kind associated with maintenance work. Men in expensive suits were being discreetly escorted through side entrances, avoiding the main corridors where family members and regular staff might encounter them. The security arrangements for these visits were notably different from standard royal protocols. Instead of the usual palace protection officers, Catherine observed security personnel she didn't recognize. Their bearing and equipment suggested they were private contractors rather than official royal protection. Catherine's art background had taught her to notice details others might miss. The men entering the palace carried themselves with the confidence of people accustomed to power and influence. Their clothing, watches, and accessories suggested significant wealth. More importantly, their behavior indicated they were familiar with the palace layout, suggesting these weren't first-time visits. She managed to position herself where she could observe one of these meetings from a distance. Through a partially open door, she saw William engaged in what appeared to be an intense discussion with three men. The conversation was too quiet to hear, but the body language was unmistakable. This was serious business being conducted in complete secrecy. One of the men was someone Catherine recognized from recent news coverage. Alexander Petrov, a businessman with extensive holdings in Eastern Europe and connections to several governments that maintained complicated relationships with the United Kingdom. His presence at a secret meeting in the palace raised immediate red flags about the nature of these gatherings. The implications began to crystallize for Catherine. If William was meeting with individuals like Petrov without proper oversight or documentation, it could suggest involvement in activities that bypassed normal diplomatic channels. Such arrangements could have serious consequences for the monarchy's carefully maintained political neutrality. Catherine decided she needed an ally within the palace structure, someone who might be willing to provide information or at least confirm her observations. She thought carefully about who might be trustworthy and concluded that Thomas Harrison, A mid-level administrator in the private secretary's office might be her best option. Thomas had always been professionally friendly, and she had noticed that he seemed uncomfortable with some of the recent changes in palace operations. More importantly, he had a reputation for integrity and had been passed over for several promotions despite his competence, possibly because he was unwilling to compromise his principles. Catherine arranged to encounter Thomas casually during one of her regular walks through the palace. She engaged him in conversation about general palace operations and gradually steered the discussion toward recent changes in procedures and protocols. Thomas's responses were careful but revealing. He confirmed that there had been significant changes in how certain meetings were being scheduled and managed. He admitted that some activities were being coordinated outside normal channels and that staff members have been instructed to maintain absolute confidentiality about specific arrangements. When Catherine pressed gently for more details, Thomas became visibly uncomfortable. He explained that he had signed additional confidentiality agreements and that his job security depended on his discretion. But his discomfort suggested that he was troubled by what he was being asked to facilitate. The conversation with Thomas confirmed Catherine's worst fears. William wasn't simply having private meetings. He was conducting business that required exceptional secrecy and involved people whose activities could compromise the royal family's reputation and political standing. Catherine realized she needed to understand the financial implications of whatever William was involved in. Royal finances were heavily regulated and monitored, but if William had found ways to conduct business outside official channels, there could be serious legal and ethical violations. She began paying closer attention to William's behavior and noticed subtle changes she had previously attributed to the pressures of royal life. He was more secretive about his phone calls, more defensive when she asked about his schedule, and more prone to unexplained absences that didn't align with his official diary. William had also been receiving mail at the palace that was being handled differently from normal correspondence. Instead of going through the usual sorting and security procedures, certain packages and letters were being delivered directly to his private study by security personnel rather than regular postal staff. The children had begun to notice their father's changed behavior as well. Prince George had mentioned that William seemed distracted during their weekend activities and had missed several promised outings. Princess Charlotte had asked why her father spent so much time in his study with the door closed. Catherine found herself in an impossible position. As William's wife, she owed him loyalty and support. As a member of the royal family, she had a duty to protect the institution from scandal and political complications. As a mother, she was concerned about the impact of this situation on their children's future. The upcoming state dinner was going to present particular challenges. Several heads of government would be attending, along with diplomats and business leaders from around the world. If William's secret activities became known during such a high-profile event, the consequences could be catastrophic for British diplomatic relations. Catherine decided she needed to confront William directly, but she wanted to be strategic about when and how to approach the conversation. She needed to choose a moment when he would be least likely to deflect or avoid the discussion. The opportunity came when William returned from what was supposed to be a private visit to Scotland. According to his official schedule, he had been attending a conservation meeting, but Catherine had done some research and discovered that no such meeting had taken place on the dates in question. She waited until the children were asleep and the palace staff had retired for the evening before approaching William in his study. She found him reviewing documents that he quickly closed when she entered, another indication that his activities were far from routine. Catherine began the conversation carefully, expressing concern about his recent stress levels and asking if there was anything troubling him. William's initial responses were dismissive, suggesting that royal duties naturally involve pressure and complexity. When Catherine pressed further, asking specifically about his recent travels and meetings, William became defensive. He reminded her that his role as heir to the throne sometimes required him to handle sensitive matters that couldn't be discussed, even with family members. The conversation escalated when Catherine mentioned that she had noticed unusual activity in the palace, and that staff members seemed to be operating under different protocols than usual. William's reaction was sharper than she had expected, accusing her of spying on palace operations and questioning his judgment. Catherine realized that William's defensiveness confirmed her suspicions. If his activities were legitimate royal business, he would have been able to explain them or at least reassure her that everything was appropriate. His refusal to discuss the matter suggested that he knew his actions were problematic. The argument that followed was unlike any they had experienced in their marriage. William accused Catherine of being paranoid and interfering with matters beyond her understanding. Catherine countered that as his wife and a senior member of the royal family, she had every right to be concerned about activities that could affect their family and the monarchy. The conversation ended without resolution, with William storming out of the room and Catherine left with more questions than answers. But the interaction had provided crucial information. William's anger and defensiveness suggested that whatever he was involved in was significant enough that exposure would have serious consequences. Over the following days, the tension between them was palpable. Palace staff began to notice the change in their interactions, though they were too professional to comment directly. The usual warmth and partnership that characterized their public appearances seemed forced and artificial. Catherine realized that she was now in a race against time. Whatever William was involved in appeared to be escalating, with more frequent meetings and increased security measures. If she was going to uncover the truth and potentially intervene before serious damage was done, she needed to act quickly. She began to develop a plan that would allow her to gather more concrete evidence while maintaining plausible deniability about her investigation. The plan involved leveraging her relationships with various palace staff members and using her access to different areas of the building to observe activities more systematically. The plan was risky. If discovered, it could destroy her marriage and potentially damage her standing within the royal family. But Catherine had come to believe that the stakes were too high to remain passive. The photographs had revealed the tip of an iceberg, and she was determined to understand its full scope before it could cause irreparable damage. As she prepared to implement her plan, Catherine reflected on how dramatically her life had changed since discovering those photographs. The woman who had once felt secure in her role and confident in her marriage now felt like she was navigating a dangerous game where the rules were unclear and the consequences were potentially devastating. The palace that had been her home now felt like a place full of secrets and hidden agendas. The husband she had trusted implicitly was now someone whose activities she felt compelled to investigate. The institution she had devoted her adult life to serving was potentially at risk from decisions being made in the shadows. But Catherine had never been one to back down from challenges, and she wasn't going to start now. Whatever the cost, she was determined to protect her family and the monarchy from the consequences of William's secret activities. That Catherine's plan required precision and careful timing. She had identified 3 key opportunities to gather more information about William's activities. During the weekly household staff meetings when certain areas of the palace would be empty, during the evening hours when official business was concluded, but private meetings often continued, and during William's scheduled absences when she could potentially access his private study. The first opportunity came during a staff meeting that Catherine normally wouldn't attend. She made an excuse about checking on arrangements for an upcoming charity event and used the time to explore areas of the palace where the secret meetings had been taking place. What she discovered was more extensive than she had imagined. One of the conference rooms had been modified with additional security equipment, including what appeared to be signal-blocking technology and enhanced soundproofing. The modifications were professional and expensive, suggesting that these arrangements were intended to be permanent rather than temporary measures. In an adjacent office, Catherine found documents that had been left behind after a meeting. The papers were mostly in languages she didn't recognize, but she could identify financial figures and what appeared to be contractual agreements. The sums involved were staggering, running into hundreds of millions of pounds. Catherine used her phone to photograph the documents quickly before returning them to their original positions. She knew that removing them would immediately alert whoever was responsible for the meetings, but the photographs would provide crucial evidence of the scale and nature of William's involvement. The documents revealed connections to industries and regions that were politically sensitive for the British government: arms manufacturing, resource extraction in disputed territories, and financial services in countries with questionable human rights records all appear to be part of whatever agreements were being negotiated. The implications were staggering. If William was facilitating or endorsing business deals in these areas, he was potentially compromising British foreign policy and putting the monarchy in an impossible position regarding political neutrality. Catherine's investigation took on new urgency when she realized that one of the documents bore the seal of a foreign government that was currently under international sanctions. Any business dealings with this entity would be not just politically problematic, but potentially illegal under British law. She decided to confide in someone outside the palace who might be able to help her understand the legal implications of what she had discovered. Lady Margaret Thornsbury, a longtime family friend and retired diplomat, had the knowledge and discretion Catherine needed. The meeting with Lady Margaret took place at a private club in London, away from palace grounds and potential surveillance. Catherine shared her concerns carefully, presenting them as hypothetical situations rather than specific accusations against William. Lady Margaret's reaction was immediate and alarming. The scenarios Catherine described would constitute serious violations of diplomatic protocol and potentially criminal activity. She urged Catherine to consider the possibility that William might be being manipulated or blackmailed rather than acting voluntarily. The conversation with Lady Margaret opened up possibilities Catherine hadn't considered. Perhaps William wasn't the primary actor in these arrangements, but rather a target of sophisticated foreign influence operations. The meetings could be attempts to compromise him rather than business deals he was actively pursuing. This perspective made Catherine's investigation even more critical. If William was being manipulated, he might not fully understand the implications of his actions. If he was being blackmailed, he might feel he had no choice but to continue participating in activities he knew were wrong. Catherine returned to the palace with a new strategy. Instead of focusing solely on William's activities, she began to pay attention to the people around him who might be influencing his decisions. Sir Marcus Whitfield's behavior had become increasingly suspicious, and Catherine began to suspect that he might be more than just an enabler of William's secret meetings. Her suspicions about Sir Marcus were confirmed when she observed a private conversation between him and one of the foreign visitors. The interaction was brief, but clearly significant, involving the exchange of what appeared to be a small package and a conversation conducted entirely in whispers. Catherine realized that Sir Marcus might be the key to understanding the entire situation. As William's private secretary, he controlled access to information, managed schedules, and coordinated activities. If he was compromised or working with external interests, he would be in a perfect position to manipulate William into participating in activities that serve those interests rather than British ones. The challenge was proving her suspicions without alerting Sir Marcus to her investigation. Catherine needed evidence that would demonstrate his involvement and potentially provide William with a way out of whatever situation he had become entangled in. The opportunity to gather this evidence came during a state function when Sir Marcus would be occupied with official duties. Catherine used her access to different areas of the palace to search his office for any documentation that might reveal his true role in the secret meetings. What she found exceeded her worst fears. Sir Marcus had been systematically documenting William's activities, creating a record that could be used for blackmail or political leverage. The files contained photographs, recordings, and detailed notes about every meeting, every agreement, and every compromise William had made. More disturbing was the discovery that Sir Marcus had been in communication with foreign intelligence services for several years. The correspondence revealed a complex web of relationships that positioned him as an asset for multiple governments, each seeking to influence British royal family activities for their own purposes. Catherine realized that William was not just involved in questionable business deals. He was being systematically compromised by a sophisticated intelligence operation that used his trusted advisor as the primary mechanism of control. The discovery explained many of the inconsistencies Catherine had observed. William's defensiveness wasn't necessarily guilt about his actions, but rather the stress of being trapped in a situation he couldn't escape without serious consequences. His secrecy wasn't about hiding voluntary activities, but about protecting himself and the royal family from the fallout of unwilling participation in foreign influence operations. Catherine faced a critical decision about how to proceed. Confronting William directly with this information could provide him with the opportunity to break free from the manipulation, but it could also escalate the situation dangerously if Sir Marcus realized his operation had been discovered. She decided to approach Thomas Harrison again, this time with more specific questions about Sir Marcus's activities and changes in palace operations. Thomas's responses confirmed many of Catherine's suspicions while providing additional details about how the manipulation had been implemented. According to Thomas, Sir Marcus had gradually increased his control over information flow and access to William over the past 2 years. Traditional checks and balances within the palace hierarchy had been bypassed through seemingly minor procedural changes that collectively gave Sir Marcus unprecedented influence over royal activities. Thomas also revealed that several longtime palace staff members had been reassigned or had resigned under pressure, particularly those who had questioned new procedures or expressed concerns about changes in security protocols. The pattern suggested a systematic effort to remove potential obstacles to Sir Marcus's operation. Catherine realized that exposing Sir Marcus would require more than just the evidence she had gathered. She needed to build a case that would be convincing to authorities while protecting William from the political fallout of having been manipulated by foreign intelligence services. The complexity of the situation was overwhelming. Any public exposure of foreign influence operations within the royal household would create a constitutional crisis and potentially damage Britain's international relationships. But allowing the situation to continue could lead to even more serious compromises of British sovereignty and royal independence. Catherine's investigation had also revealed the human cost of the situation. William had been showing signs of significant stress and depression, symptoms that she now understood as the result of being trapped in an impossible situation rather than voluntary participation in questionable activities. The children had been affected as well, picking up on the tension between their parents and the general atmosphere of secrecy and suspicion that had developed around their father. Prince George had begun asking questions about why certain palace staff members had left and why his father seemed constantly worried. Catherine knew that whatever action she took would have consequences that extended far beyond her marriage and family. The monarchy itself was at stake, along with Britain's political independence and the safety of everyone involved in the situation. The deadline for action was approaching rapidly. Intelligence gathered from Sir Marcus's communications suggested that a major operation was planned for the upcoming international summit, where world leaders would be gathering in London. If Sir Marcus's handlers intended to use William for some kind of political manipulation during this event, the consequences could be catastrophic. Catherine realized she had to choose between protecting her husband's reputation and protecting the country and the monarchy from foreign manipulation. The weight of this decision was crushing, but she knew that the evidence she had gathered left her no choice but to act. Her plan was to present the evidence to Sir David Richardson, the cabinet secretary, who would have the authority and resources to address foreign intelligence threats while potentially protecting William from public exposure. But approaching Sir David would mean crossing a line from which there would be no return, potentially destroying her marriage and her relationship with the royal family forever. As Catherine prepared for this crucial meeting, she reflected on how completely her world had changed since discovering those initial photographs. The woman who had once lived a life of relative certainty and clear purpose now found herself at the center of a complex international situation with implications she was still struggling to fully understand. The palace that had been her sanctuary now felt like a battlefield where every interaction had to be analyzed for hidden meanings and potential threats. The husband she had trusted completely was now someone she was trying to save from consequences he might not even fully comprehend. But Catherine had discovered something about herself through this crisis. She was stronger and more resourceful than she had ever imagined. The investigation skills she had developed, the evidence she had gathered, and the analysis she had conducted demonstrated capabilities she didn't know she possessed. More importantly, she had discovered that her commitment to protecting the monarchy and serving the country was even stronger than her personal loyalty to William. This realization was painful, but also empowering, giving her the courage to take the final steps necessary to resolve the situation. The meeting with Sir David Richardson took place in the secure offices of the Cabinet Office, far from the watchful eyes and listening devices that Catherine now suspected were monitoring palace activities. She had requested the meeting through unofficial channels, using a contact from her pre-royal life who worked in government communications. Sir David's reaction to Catherine's evidence was immediate and professional. As one of the most senior civil servants in the British government, he had seen enough intelligence briefings to recognize the severity of what she had uncovered. The documents and photographs she provided painted a clear picture of a sophisticated foreign influence operation that had successfully compromised the heir to the throne. The cabinet secretary's first concern was confirming the authenticity of Catherine's evidence, while ensuring that the investigation didn't alert Sir Marcus or his handlers to the fact that their operation had been discovered. This required bringing in a small team of trusted intelligence professionals who could analyze the materials without triggering security protocols that might be monitored by hostile services. Within hours, the analysis confirmed Catherine's worst fears. Sir Marcus Whitfield had indeed been recruited by foreign intelligence services and had been systematically manipulating William for nearly 3 years. The operation was more extensive than even Catherine had realized, involving multiple foreign governments and aimed at gradually compromising British foreign policy through royal influence. The intelligence team's findings revealed that William had been targeted specifically because of his position as heir and his genuine desire to make a positive impact through royal duties. His legitimate interest in international development and conflict resolution had been exploited to draw him into meetings and agreements that served foreign rather than British interests. Sir David explained to Catherine that William was not the first member of a royal family to be targeted by such operations, but the sophistication and success of this particular scheme was unprecedented. The gradual nature of the manipulation meant that William might not have realized how far he had been drawn into compromising situations. The immediate challenge was how to extract William from the operation without triggering a crisis that could damage the monarchy or British diplomatic relationships. Any sudden change in William's behavior or activities could alert Sir Marcus and his handlers, potentially leading them to activate contingency plans that could be even more damaging. Sir David proposed a carefully coordinated operation that would involve gradually replacing Sir Marcus's access and influence while building a case that could eventually be used for prosecution or diplomatic leverage. The plan required Catherine to continue her normal activities while secretly providing intelligence about ongoing developments within the palace. Catherine agreed to this dangerous role, understanding that she was now effectively operating as an intelligence asset within her own home. The psychological pressure of maintaining normalcy while documenting her husband's continued manipulation was enormous, but she recognized that the stakes were too high to refuse. The first phase of the operation involved introducing new security measures throughout the palace under the guise of routine upgrades. These measures included enhanced surveillance capabilities that would allow intelligence services to monitor Sir Marcus's activities without his knowledge. Catherine's role during this phase was to observe and report on any changes in behavior that might suggest Sir Marcus was becoming suspicious. She had to maintain her normal interactions with palace staff while paying careful attention to signs that the operation might be in jeopardy. The psychological toll on Catherine was severe. She was lying to her husband about her activities, cooperating with intelligence services in monitoring her own home, and carrying the weight of knowing that William's reputation and the monarchy's stability depended on the success of their covert operation. The strain on her marriage became increasingly difficult to hide. William noticed her distraction and emotional distance, but his own stress from the ongoing manipulation made it difficult for him to address their relationship problems effectively. Their conversations became superficial and tense, lacking the intimacy and trust that had once characterized their partnership. The children were also affected by the deteriorating atmosphere in their home. Prince George began having nightmares and expressed anxiety about his parents' relationship. Princess Charlotte became more clingy and demanded constant reassurance about family stability. Even young Prince Louis seemed to sense the tension and became more difficult to manage during routine activities. The breakthrough in the operation came when intelligence services successfully intercepted communications between Sir Marcus and his foreign contacts. The intercepted messages revealed plans for a major operation during the upcoming G7 summit, where William's position would be used to facilitate meetings between foreign officials and British government representatives outside normal diplomatic channels. This intelligence provided the justification needed for immediate action. Sir David coordinated with security services to arrest Sir Marcus and several of his associates on charges related to foreign intelligence activities and breaches of the Official Secrets Act. The arrest took place early one morning when Sir Marcus arrived at the palace for his normal duties. To minimize disruption and maintain operational security, he was quietly detained and removed from the premises before other staff members arrived for work. Catherine was present when William was briefed about Sir Marcus's arrest and the true nature of the activities he had been manipulated into supporting. William's reaction was a mixture of shock, relief, and profound embarrassment at having been so thoroughly deceived by someone he had trusted completely. The briefing session was conducted by Sir David and senior intelligence officials who explained the sophisticated nature of the operation and emphasized that William had been a victim rather than a willing participant in foreign influence activities. They provided detailed evidence of how Sir Marcus had gradually manipulated information and access to draw William into compromising situations. William's initial response was anger at having been deceived, followed by concern about the potential consequences for the monarchy and his family. He was particularly worried about how the situation might affect Catherine and their children, not knowing the extent of her involvement in uncovering the operation. Catherine faced a difficult decision about whether to reveal her role in the investigation. Sir David had advised her that this information could remain classified, allowing her to maintain plausible deniability about her intelligence activities. But Catherine realized that honesty with William was essential for rebuilding trust in their marriage. The conversation between Catherine and William about her investigation was one of the most difficult of their marriage. William was initially hurt and angry that she had suspected him of wrongdoing and had investigated him secretly. He felt betrayed by her lack of trust and her willingness to involve outside authorities in their personal affairs. Catherine explained her perspective carefully, emphasizing that her investigation had been motivated by concern for his welfare and protection of their family rather than suspicion of criminal activity. She described her growing realization that he was being manipulated rather than acting voluntarily, and her determination to find a way to help him escape the situation. The healing process for their marriage was gradual and difficult. William had to come to terms with having been manipulated so thoroughly, while Catherine had to deal with the emotional aftermath of months of deception and investigation. Both had to rebuild trust that had been damaged by the secrecy and suspicion that had dominated their relationship during the crisis. The children required careful attention as the family worked to restore stability and normalcy to their lives. Professional counselors were brought in to help them process the changes they had observed in their parents' behavior and to address any anxiety or confusion about family dynamics. The public dimension of the crisis was managed through careful coordination between palace communications staff and government press offices. The official story focused on routine security updates and staff changes without revealing the true nature of the foreign influence operation. Sir Marcus's prosecution was handled through special courts that could manage classified evidence without revealing sensitive operational details. The case was presented as a straightforward espionage matter without specifically mentioning the royal family's involvement. The international implications of the operation required delicate diplomatic management. Several foreign governments were implicated in the influence activities, necessitating careful negotiations to prevent the situation from escalating into a broader diplomatic crisis. Catherine's role in uncovering and resolving the situation remained classified, though she received private recognition from intelligence services for her crucial contribution to protecting national security. The skills and courage she had demonstrated during the investigation led to informal consultations about other security matters affecting the royal family. The long-term consequences of the crisis extended beyond the immediate family to the broader institution of the monarchy. New security protocols were implemented to prevent similar manipulation attempts, and the relationship between the royal household and government security services was restructured to provide better protection against foreign influence operations. William's recovery from the psychological impact of manipulation required professional support and time. He had to rebuild his confidence in his judgment and his ability to serve effectively as heir to the throne. The experience had taught him valuable lessons about the sophisticated threats facing the modern monarchy. Catherine emerged from the crisis with a deeper understanding of her own capabilities and a stronger sense of her role in protecting the monarchy and her family. The investigation had revealed strengths and skills she hadn't known she possessed, changing her perspective on her abilities and her responsibilities. The marriage survived the crisis, but it was fundamentally changed by the experience. Both Catherine and William had learned difficult lessons about trust, communication, and the complex pressures facing their family. Their relationship became stronger in some ways, but more complicated in others. The palace returned to its normal rhythms gradually, but the staff and procedures were forever changed by the security upgrades and new protocols implemented in response to the crisis. The institution had learned valuable lessons about its vulnerabilities and the sophisticated threats it faced in the modern world. As Catherine walked through the palace gardens months later, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed since discovering those first photographs. The woman who had once felt secure in her understanding of royal life now carried the weight of knowing how complex and dangerous that life could be. But she also carried the satisfaction of having protected her family and her country from a serious threat. The investigation had been terrifying and emotionally devastating, but it had also demonstrated that the values and institutions she served were worth defending, even at great personal cost. The palace walls that had once seemed like protective barriers now felt like part of a complex system that required constant vigilance to maintain. Catherine understood that her role as a guardian of the monarchy extended far beyond public appearances and charitable work to include protecting the institution from threats that most people would never know existed. The photographs that had started everything remained locked away as classified evidence, but their impact on Catherine's life was permanent. She had discovered that sometimes the greatest service to the people you love requires actions they might never understand or appreciate, and that protecting an institution sometimes means making sacrifices that will never be publicly acknowledged. The palace would continue to watch, as it always had, but Catherine now knew that sometimes the palace needed to be protected by those it watched over. The responsibility was enormous, but she had proven to herself and others that she was capable of bearing it.